Stranger Things, it's predicated on like MK Ultra stuff. The government really had this experiments they did on children, and they called it MK Ultra, and like Project Artichoke, and what's one of the other ones? I don't know. And all the Kinsey pervert stuff. They're doing experiments on children, and the Montauk Project, that's the other one, and all that stuff. So that's what Stranger Things is based on, where they took kids, traumatized them, and then tried to put demons in them. And in Stranger Things, that's what it's about. Now, I talked about like sacrificing to demons, like the Aztecs would kill somebody and spill the blood, and then that would appease the demon. It's in the Bible that there's to be no bloodletting, and that when you're mourning, you're not supposed to cut your arms and let blood out. Because, and why did God say no to this? Because it's making offerings to demons. Demons want this. When young people do self-harm and they make cuts in themselves, these are offerings to demons. They're troubled in their minds, and for some reason that they can't, that's unreasonable really, for some unknown reason, when they do that, for a time, the pain goes away. It's because on the spiritual level, they're being tormented by demons, and when they make a blood sacrifice, which is an esoteric ritual, they're actually doing the thing. They're doing little blood offerings to demons, and that makes the pain go away. Now, what happens in Stranger Things when 11 powers up, and all those other kids that were in the group with 11, when their powers are activated, they bleed a little. How are the kids in Stranger Things' powers activated? Well, we find out from Vecnar that the powers are activated by trauma. So you go to your most unhappiest moment and unlock the anger and the rage and the hurt and the fear and anxiety and everything like that. And then you use that so you can have psychic powers. And one of the things that comes along with that is the blood coming out of their nose, because it wasn't just 11 that happens to. It happens to all the kids when they use their powers to get nosebleeds. That's blood sacrifice. They're making a blood offering. They're spilling their own blood. It's coming out of their nose, and that's an offering to the demon, and then their powers fire up. And they fire up their powers through trauma. This is the way that the evil preys upon people. You get people in a weakened and vulnerable state, then you can influence them. It's what torturers do. They torture people, and when they're weak, they get the information that they want. But when you're talking about demons, if you catch somebody in a vulnerable state, then you can manipulate them and make them do what you want. That's part of how people get possessed. In Stranger Things, Vecnar knew that he was empowered by traumatizing people, and he worked on developing that ability. So then what he does when that guy is killed on the astral realm, the guy that becomes Vecnar, now he's on the spiritual realm, and he goes into people's weakest moments and traumatizes them, and takes and collects their souls or their spirit or whatever, and takes them to the upside down. The upside down is an inversion of our world. That's what satanic occultism is. Whatever it is that God says to do, you do the opposite. So what is the upside down? It's a symbolic, exoteric ritual of Luciferian inversion. What's the right way to do things? Here's the wrong way. Here's the world, the world that we live in, material embodiment. Let's blur the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal. So in Stranger Things, the goal of Vecnar and whatever demon possesses him, or however it turns out, because it's not over yet. Like, they're making the last season, but nobody knows how it ends because we didn't see it yet, and I don't know that I will. But they want to blur the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal. And what's a big thing in Stranger Things? They take drugs. They give the kids drugs to put them in altered states. They go into the Joe Rogan flotation tank the sensory deprivation tank. You cut off all your senses and take drugs, psychedelics, like Joe Rogan talks about taking mushrooms and going into the isolation tank. And really what you're doing is you're taking drugs, cutting off all the rest of your senses and blurring the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal, because that's what taking drugs does. You're blurring the states between that which is physical material reality and being sober, and then you're blurring that boundary with drugs, like the crazy dreams that people have on Ambien or Lunesta or whatever, and these drugs that people take because they have insomnia and they can't sleep, so they take something to keep them asleep, and then they wake up and they have like the craziest dreams. And some people do this on purpose. There's certain things that you can take that you can just go to the vitamin shop to buy, and you can study lucid dreaming, and you can be aware that you're in the astral realm, because God in the Bible said that there's realms, if that matters to you for this. So Stranger Things is all about doing stuff in the astral realm, because Vecna is kind of like a Freddy Krueger character, and people will go into an altered state of consciousness, like when they're asleep or in their dreams, and then he has influence over them, because that's a blurring between the boundaries of corporeal and incorporeal. Think about the messed up stuff people do when they're not really themselves on drugs, and they do all kinds of stuff that's out of character or strange, or they steal stuff, and people are like, I don't know how they figured out where that was, but they tore they tore the walls apart to get to the money or whatever it was, and they're like, I don't know how anybody would know that was in there. Well, the demons know. The demons know. They're all around, all over the place, and when somebody goes in to rob or burgle the place, then the demons that are influencing the person say, go look here, and then the person will feel I'm just going to start tearing the wall apart, looking for money for drugs, and they're probably high already or whatever, and then they do all this weird stuff. Inhuman feats of strength is in the Bible. The guy who's possessed in the Bible, Jesus cast demons out of a whole bunch of people, and one of the guys, they can't hold him with chains, and he hangs out in the graveyard, and he's throwing himself in the fire and against the rocks because he's possessed and he has inhuman strength, and then Jesus casts the demons out. Then Jesus asks another guy, what's your name, demon? And then one demon answers for the rest of the demons, and he says, our name is Legion, for we are many. So that's letting you know that the one guy has a whole bunch of demons in him, and then God casts those demons out into the swine, and then he drowns the swine, and the demon have nothing to possess anymore. Because probably what would have happened is those pigs were livestock, people would have eaten the pigs and taken that flesh into them, and God didn't want people to eat pigs because that's part of the Old Testament. So people could have gotten possessed by eating pork. I don't know. But anyway, in one ways, like Stranger Things is about opening portals to the demonic and bringing that into our world. But also, I guess I could say that we are portals, or have the opportunity. Like one of the things when we talk about demons is that we can call upon God and pray that he would rest his spirit upon us. That would be the Holy Spirit, right? That's the only one you want. You don't want spirits in you, because all the rest of them are bad. There's only one that's any good, and that's his Holy Spirit. But opening portals to the demonic through trauma in weak moments, when people have weak moments and they're broken down, that's an opportunity to be preyed upon by evil. We're in a weak moment, and it's in those weak moments that we can be influenced. It's what torturers do. Interrogator tortures someone, and you just keep breaking the person down till you can influence them to get them to do what you want, or to tell you stuff that they were trained not to tell you when they interrogate soldiers and stuff. And some of the soldiers have training to fight against interrogation so that they can't be broken down, so that they can't give up secrets. So it's like a known technique. So why wouldn't demons do the same thing? Latch onto somebody's trauma and ruin them. I mean, that's what Vecnar does in Stranger Things. He goes into people's memories and mind and deepest, darkest places, stuff that demons know about, and then, you know, then he takes them, and then, you know, it's a movie and everything, so like the people's, they're like, and all their bones break and their eyes pop out. But that's after he gets them to succumb to, you know, like to give up, because he takes them to their darkest places and they're afraid of him, and then he takes that person over. And is that not demonic possession? You know, something happens to a like, you know, exorcists casting demons out. I mean, our world has exorcists. They cast the demons out. And Stranger Things is all about that. It's about destroying this world and opening it up so that the whole world gets ruined and destroyed. And within Stranger Things, like between this world and the upside down, that meeting place between corporeal and incorporeal, it's about, that's what Stranger Things is all about, that where like some of the kids are in upside down, and then the other kids are in our world, and they find the place in between, which is what happens when people take drugs. When you take psychedelic drugs, you're blurring the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal. One of the big advocates of the 1960s counterculture revolution, one of the guys who helped shape it, was Timothy Leary, who made drugs in laboratories, and he openly admitted by looking into the camera directly, telling the audience watching, you know, the interview talk show or whatever, and he said everything that he did for Lucifer, and he says it himself. So Timothy Leary telling people to take drugs, he was doing for the devil. What does that mean? It means he wanted people to take psychedelic drugs because it blurs the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal, and it allows demons to have an influence on us. It's the thing that happens when somebody's prescription meds get messed up and they start hearing voices. What do the voices always tell that person to do? Often is self-harm. They get people to do bad stuff, and they get really depressed, and they want to shuffle themselves off this mortal coil, do self-harm, harm others. This is the influence of the demonic, because those, even prescription drugs that you can go get for your doctor that he can prescribe, like to make changes in your emotional state or to affect how you live. When you hear voices, you're hearing demonic voices, and they always tell you to hurt yourself or other people. That was started by the 1960s counterculture revolution. What is the 1960s counterculture revolution? What was counter the culture of the 1960s? Families? Yeah, the 1960s counterculture revolution was about tune in, turn on, and drop out. So it meant like take drugs and be a dirty, smelly hippie and live in a commune, which just sounds like communism, and become some kind of burnout. And a lot of people did that, and it did have an effect on America, you know, because, you know, just stop being productive, stop being a member of society, help it break down, and drugs help people do that. Look at what drugs have done to society. Look at how they've destroyed families for, you know, like a long time. And Stranger Things, when you watch that, you are a participant in an exoteric ritual, like when you play a video game. You're not really doing the thing, but symbolically you're doing the thing. Like when the shaman dresses up like the spirit that it wants to inhabit him, and then that helps the village. And sometimes that requires blood, like some of the religions where they kill animals and give their blood. I mean, that's what they did in the Old Testament. They used to make offerings to God, And then, in time, God said, okay, did these offerings to me, but I never wanted that from you guys. What do you think? I made everything, and then you kill stuff and say, look what I did, God, here for you. God didn't, he told him what to do, but that's because the whole world was like already overrun with people doing ritual blood sacrifice and offering animals and people and babies. And he was trying to like change mankind and say, I don't want you to do that. But still to this day, there are religions like Santeria and all different voodoo and stuff where they kill goats and chickens and all that stuff. And these things, remnants of these things, are just outright rituals still exist today, where sprinkling blood on the altar for temple and all this Shabbat, and halal foods, and doing a prayer to Allah before they cut the animal's throat and all this stuff like that. That's not necessary. It's one thing to be thankful for food, but I don't know if God wants you to go that far. But in Stranger Things, you can see it's about opening portals to the demonic. And yes, Stranger Things is it's influenced by all the 80s stuff because the world was better, and people that were alive in the 80s like, yeah, it was better. I want to watch this and be nostalgic, which is a form of mental derangement. If you look up the definition of nostalgia, it says a form of mental derangement. So I'm not saying people that like Stranger Things are deranged. I'm just saying it's a fondness for a simpler time with the framework of the horror stuff that's in it. And don't just want to eat junk food before we knew it was bad, and go to the mall and the economy was better. And then young people watch this who weren't alive in the 1980s or even in the 1990s, and they go, yeah, I would like to be alive back then because it was a better place, and everyone can agree that it probably was. And, easier life, depending on what part of the world you lived in. So, I think that's a big part of the appeal of Stranger Things. But also, it is about now, like watching this thing where the world's in peril and it's trying to be made darker. And I think a lot of people feel that. So going back to the 1980s is a form of escapism because of the nostalgia for 1980s mall culture and all that stuff. And it's not the same like it is. A simpler time, no cell phones, computers were not computers and the internet on our phone was not dominating our lives, and we were freer and probably healthier and happier and less traumatized. But that's the whole thing of Stranger Things, is how they get their powers is through trauma, latching on to your unhappiest moment and focusing on that and using it to unlock your secret powers, which aren't really secret powers. You're just being influenced by demons. It's channeling. You're opening yourself to the demonic. Music. One of the things that's important to Stranger Things is music. Making that girl listen to the awful Kate Bush song is just a way of brainwashing. Again, when they're torturing people to get information, it's a known technique. When they were trying to get the Branch Davidians to come out of their compound in Waco, Texas, they blasted music and they're trying to make them go crazy with sounds of rabbits being killed. And music, when they went into Iraq, they were playing heavy metal music, and they were playing that was a Metallica or Pantera song. He just kept playing it over and over again. It's a way to wear on somebody, to traumatize them, to get them to do what you want. But in Stranger Things, they're saying it's empowering, because I heard that song that I liked and it brought me out of it. This is all MK Ultra stuff. One of the things that they used to do to MK Ultra was play Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and it's like about disassociation. Disassociation is a way, and now they have a thing called dissociative disorder. So disassociating from reality is something somebody does to help overcome being overwhelmed by trauma. You get overwhelmed and then you go to another place, and there's all kinds of freaky stuff in the MK Ultra experiments, and Project Monarch was one I hadn't mentioned before. where they brainwash people and they traumatize them, to program them, which lets demons in. But also it's a way of breaking people's will. I forget what these experiments were called, but there's the example of the woman who was alive that nobody denied that this happened to her, and it was admitted, and there's like, you know, a lot known about this, where a woman was depressed, so she went to this clinic and they figured out how to wipe her mind. And then when they sent her home from, you know, they sent her home from the psychiatric center, she didn't know who she was, she didn't remember her kids, she didn't remember anything, because they wiped this woman, they traumatized her so much they wiped her mind. So that did that in Stranger Things to 11. She didn't know who she was. She's called Matthew Modine Papa. And they did that to all those kids. They traumatized those kids and wiped their minds, even though like 11 has some memories of her mom or whatever. I haven't seen it all, but this is just fresh in my mind because I saw it over Thanksgiving, a couple episodes. And so they wipe these kids' minds so that they can do whatever they want with them. It's brainwashing. It's what cults do. Cults do one form of brainwashing to a person, and drugs are a lot of times involved. And also we know that people were traumatized. It could be so bad that they get overwhelmed and then they just block it out and they forget. And it's only years later, after some kind of trauma happened, maybe in their childhood or even in adult life, that they block it out. And then they remember it, like parts of it start to come back. It was too overwhelming to handle, so they compartmentalized it and isolated it and put it away. And that's what they do to all the kids in the Stranger Things, Project Dream Child thing, that 11 and all those other kids were in, and Vecnar was in all that and stuff. And he was like patient zero or whatever for all that brainwashing shit. So this is all stuff that came from life that they did to kids. This was also in a J.J. Abrams show called Fringe. And before I'll talk about Fringe also had putting kids in an isolation tank to go to disassociate and go to another place. J.J. Abrams is, I believe, the reason for Stranger Things, that it exists at all. Because J.J. Abrams did a movie called Super 8, which was an imitation of the Amblin films from the 1980s. And the 1980s Amblin films were all about children in peril. Let's take a bunch of kids, put them in real life peril, and then there'll be 1980s kids' trauma, but also warm, fuzzy memories when they grow up and go back and watch these things. So Super 8 was very much like Stranger Things, because they say that it was about aliens. But when you have something from the sky that falls to earth, it could also be demons, like fallen angels. So in Super 8, it's a very demonic, like alien movie. Like it's less about like E.T. and aliens, but it's more like demons. And the whole town gets put under lockdown because there's an alien, which is a demon, and the alien looks like a big monster, looks like a demon. And the demon is like killing people, and it's pretty grim. It's pretty dark, Super 8. And the Zoomer kids that saw this, I think, if you saw Super 8 when you were a kid, it probably stuck with you because it's a trauma. But, like this thing called trauma bonding, and Disney's good at that. So J.J. Abrams, who was Steven Spielberg's kid's babysitter, he did Super 8, which I think is pretty much directly the inspiration for Stranger Things, even though Stranger Things, they just took stuff from, like 1980s Stephen King and Freddy Krueger stuff they brought into it, and slasher film stuff, and Kids in Peril. I think that was pretty much inspired by Super 8. But J.J. Abrams also did Fringe, where there was like interdimensional weird stuff happening, and Fringe was pretty cool. That's the only J.J. Abrams thing that I liked, and like the first 3 seasons of Fringe are pretty cool, but then the last 2 seasons suck. Oh, it's about multiverses, it's about parallel worlds. Yeah, J.J. Abrams people forget about Fringe and Super 8, but a lot of the stuff that's popular now, he's the jumping off point for all that shit, all this multiverse stuff. I know the multiverse stuff is just mirror universe stuff from Star Trek, and they did that in Deep Space Nine, and they did it in the Star Trek Next Gen and everything, and multiverses and all that stuff. But J.J. Abrams, like in the modern time, like that was a big part of Fringe and Super 8's Stranger Things. So, anyway, we're talking about Stranger Things, so I thought I'd put that in there. So, Stranger Things is a ritual that's supposed to be appealing, so you watch it, but it's also supposed to be traumatic. And when you watch those deaths by demons from another dimension, from the upside down, you're watching a ritualistic sacrifice. And besides, I just thought of this. Aren't the Ubergorgon? What's it called? The Demigorgons? What are they called? You know, those things that are just a mouth. Isn't that just the plant monsters from Resident Evil? Right? The Demigorgon? Yeah. So the Demigorgons in Stranger Things they remind me of those plant monsters from Resident Evil 2. Do you remember that? So also, it opens with a ritual. There are people that have talked about, I forget the guy's name, but there was one guy who wrote a book, and in his book he talks about how E.T. Is not about an alien from outer space, but it's about a kid in demonic possession, because Elliot meets E.T. There's a Spielberg movie with Drew Barrymore and I can't remember anybody who was famous in that movie. So anyway, so in E.T., the kid finds the alien. They're playing Dungeons and Dragons. This is how the movie opens. This is also how Stranger Things opens, and it's the same thing. It's the same ritual. The kids in E.T. are playing Dungeons and Dragons, and they do a summoning ritual, and then E.T. shows up outside in their tool shed, and they're a broken family because they're not with their dad, so they're living with their mom in a trailer or something, I think. So then Elliot goes out and he bonds with E.T. because he's the first one that meets the little ugly man that's E.T. And then E.T. and the boy have a symbiotic relationship, and E.T. has powers that we don't have. And then the little boy Elliot starts to have powers that we don't have. And by the end of the movie, they just openly say that the kid and E.T. have a symbiotic relationship because E.T. is a demon. He's an extraterrestrial. What does Steven Spielberg do before E.T.? Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He also did Jaws, but I don't know what's the order. Did he do Jaws first? And then the first movie he did was a short film about a guy who had milk of magnesia in a suitcase at the beach, and that started his film career, which is gay code for the guy who's gay. Not Spielberg, the guy in his short film. And then he did that one called The Chase, where the guy's being chased around in his car. It was pretty good. And then I think he did Jaws. And then he did Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is about man meeting aliens. But, you know, if you've been on YouTube, then you know that a lot of people say that aliens are demons. They're not aliens up there from outer space, but they're guys that got kicked out of heaven that fell down to earth. The aliens aren't up there. They're already down here, and they're in the incorporeal realm, which is the dream realm, which is the astral realm. Because in the Bible it does say that there are realms, and when we go to sleep we're in the dream realm, we're in the astral realm. That's all 80s stuff, that's all Freddy Krueger stuff, that's in Stranger Things. It's how Vecnar gets to people. He gets them in an altered state of consciousness, because sometimes the people aren't asleep when he goes after the kids. It's like, you know what I mean, like their eyes roll back and they're like, you know, they're not even asleep, they're like awake, but they're in a weakened state, and he takes them over, and you know, then he kills them and consumes their souls, or whatever the TV show, whatever that means, when he, you know, takes them in when they die. We're blurring the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal when we take drugs. When you get too drunk. Look at all the stupid shit that people do when they get drunk. The same things happen when people take vapes, and then there's combinations of all these things: prescription drugs, Delta 8 vapes, government weed, booze, pill, all the things, and then occultism and being interested in new age stuff and meditating. All these things are blurring boundaries between reality and this waking life and incorporeal. And when we blur those boundaries, we open ourselves to spiritual warfare and are under demonic influence. You're not supposed to be looking you're only supposed to be asking God for help. He's like, if you want help, you go, just ask me, and keep praying and be persistent, and pray that, that God's Holy Spirit would rest upon you, because there aren't any other spirits that you want having anything to do with you. You pray to God to keep them away. And in Stranger Things, look at all the crimes. Like, they go on crime sprees. Might as well just say it like it is. Like, they steal a camper, they're looking for guns, they do all this crazy stuff. The one season, I think, wasn't the kid a pothead in the one season? And then there was a guy, I'm the pizza man, remember all that shit? And I probably could do a better analysis if I would just watch them all again, but like, I'm not gonna do that, and I don't have Netflix. So, but from what I remember, we can talk about this stuff, because it is stuff that I know about, in terms of like, they're using MK Ultra and all that experiments in Montauk and all these other things, and Project Monarch and Project Dreamchild and Artichoke and all these things, and Michael Aquino and all being leader of the Church of Set and being in the government and all these weirdos. So that's all put into Stranger Things. That's also in Fringe, where in Fringe, the main character was a woman who's like an FBI agent or something, and as a child, she was in, again, this is something that Stranger Things took from, is Fringe, not just J.J. Abrams' Super 8, but the little girl was also in the main character of Fringe was some blonde lady, I think she's British or something, and she was put in the isolation tank, and she was experimented as a kid for psychic powers and stuff like that, and that's all the same stuff that's in Stranger Things. So anyway, do people talk about how J.J. Abrams had a huge influence on Stranger Things? Because the only reason I know about Fringe is because the shit that I was into, one of my buddies said, hey, you would like Fringe, and he kind of made me watch it with him, and I liked it. And then he said, look, I have a book. So he had a book about all the secret codes and messages that were in J.J. Abrams' Fringe. So, I'm sure it's for free. You can probably just watch it for free on Tubi or whatever if you want to get an idea of what it is. Or you could I would just suggest, give somebody a couple bucks on YouTube and go watch a YouTuber's review of Fringe. Like Fringe Explained or whatever. J.J. Abrams' Fringe Explained. And then it just gets in, it ends with multiverses, and it sucks at the end. Like everybody says, J.J. Abrams knows how to start stuff, but he doesn't know how to finish it. Well, maybe he'll figure it out if he ever gets a chance to direct anything. He finished Star Wars, he didn't figure it out yet. So anyway, Stranger Things and Duffer Brothers owe a lot to Stephen King, 80s nostalgia, and J.J. Abrams, and there's no way around that. Kate Bush sucks. So the idea that you would listen to the same Kate Bush song over and over again, which some teenagers probably have done, sounds like MK Ultra mind control to me. And there's no other dimensions that you would want to open yourself to. There's no multiverses. You're just setting yourself up for danger. If you want help, ask for God. We're earthlings. We're on a material plane. There's no other realms to go into that you would want anything to do with. You're having a hard time, you're supposed to ask God for help, not take drugs, not meditate and say Om and Ram Nam and brainwash yourself. But Stranger Things is about kids that were test subjects being traumatized, and encouraging the idea that maybe you want to get powers and abilities from trauma and demons and everything. And it makes me think of all this other stuff, like this thing is popular now, Chainsaw Man, and it's literally a show about making blood, it's a Japanese cartoon, making blood pacts with demons, and that's how you get powers. So you want to be a superhero, make a blood pact with a demon, with evil spirits. You can get the power of a gun spirit, you can get the power of a chainsaw spirit, you can get the power of bomb spirit or wolf spirit or the Oni spirit or whatever it is, and they're all spilling blood, which is forbidden in the Bible. Leviticus is a whole part of Leviticus where it says no blood play, and here's God doesn't want us messing around with blood. And you know from the Bible that Jesus was our one time only blood sacrifice, his flesh, his blood, to cover all our sins, you know, for all time until the end of time. You know, unto eternity with God in heaven forever. You know, or in the pit with Hades and Sheol thrown down on top of you and sealed and cinched. So you don't want to be down there, you want to be up here. So, you know, a lot of Stranger Things is they're underground, like they're underneath the city. And it's also about, like, you know, everything being transformed and turned into evil, taking those other realms and blurring the boundaries between corporeal and incorporeal and making, you know, our world into their hell realm. You know, like, how do the demons live? It's horrible and it's an ugly way to see the world. So in Stranger Things, that's like what, you know, Vecnar, this wounded narcissist, is trying to do. He's sicko, and all these demons, you know, working with him or for him, and they're trying to, you know, bring their world into ours, which would destroy our world. And, you know, that's the threat that these kids have to save the world from. And, you know, when you watch that stuff, you're watching a ritual sacrifice. Like when you see a Terrifier movie, which I've never seen one, but I've heard enough about them. And it's just about the kills and the violence and the gore, and he keeps getting away with it. Like, there's like 4 Terrifier movies, maybe there's 5 by now, I don't know. But, you know, like, it's the serial killer movies where they just keep getting away with it, and they're already dead, so they just keep coming back to kill more people. Michael Myers, Jason, Freddy, Chucky. I mean, that's Chucky's whole thing. The guy puts his soul inside of a toy, and now he's a possessed item. He's a possessed object, a demonically possessed, right? Wasn't that Chucky from Child's Play? It was Brad Dourif when he played Charles Lee Ray. Charles Lee Ray was a murderer, and when he died, he did a voodoo ritual to put his soul inside of, you know, whatever he wanted, but all he could do, because he was dying, was he put his soul inside of a toy. And now it's a streaming series, right? How many movies did they make of Chucky? They had a movie called The Son of Chucky or whatever. He had a baby with another doll. Like, whatever. So anyway, to stay focused on Stranger Things, there's exoteric and esoteric rituals. The esoteric ritual is where you're actually doing the thing, and the exoteric ritual is where you're pretending the thing. And when you watch movies, you're not just watching people pretend the thing, it's like you're watching the ritual. And, you know, I think, like, I'm not saying the Duffer Brothers are evil occultists. I think that people are influenced. Like, a lot of artists, the question that they hate to be asked, no matter what type of creative person they are, where it's like writing or painting or drawing or directing or sculpting or making music, the question that a lot of artists hate being asked is, where do you get those ideas from? You know, and some people will say, oh, it's a pastiche, I take ideas from this and that and there, and I'm paying tribute and homage, and I put them all together, and that's a Quentin Tarantino movie. He steals parts from other movies and puts them together. But some people hate that question because they say, I don't know where they come from, and other artists don't know nobody knows where our ideas come from. They just come to us. Yeah, that's called channeling. You're being influenced by the demonic. Some artists have, like, do a stream of consciousness, and they just sit down and they don't know what they're going to draw or where it's going, or they sit down and paint and they don't know what they're going to paint, and they do intuitive paintings or intuitive drawings, or they just do automatic writing, and they're like, I'm just going to write a story without thinking about it. And then when it's done, they have something that's really amazing that also oddly has a lot of occult satanic stuff and that people do, and it's like, I don't know, I'm not worshiping the devil. I don't read books about occultism. They just, you know, like, they make it up, and they don't know where their ideas come from. That's why they hate that question. And I've heard artists say it, and they say, I don't know where it comes from. It's a stupid question. Nobody knows where the ideas come from. Can't you just like the thing that I made? Everybody loves it. Just shut up. And they're like, well, don't you think that this is like occult or satanic? And they're like, no, because they don't live like that. They're just whispered to by demons. Some musicians say that they would just, I don't know where my ideas come from. I just sort of start hearing something, and then I play it or I write it down, and it's like, yeah, that's a whisper of demons. And some people are open occultists. Some creative types openly channel. They call it automatic writing, and they do automatic writing, and they see what they get. They do all kinds of little magic rituals where they have words and pieces of paper, and they see what turns up. And all these things can be influenced from the incorporeal realm into our world, in whatever way that evil can have an influence on us. And that's where a lot of ideas come from. And then sometimes people just outright research occultism. Like the guy who made those Hellboy movies, he's a comic book artist. So he was into H.P. Lovecraft, and he studied demonology and like probably Keys of Solomon and all stuff. So some people openly go to occult literature and learn about that, and they mine that for material for their movies and TV shows. And there's a lot of, stuff like those Conjuring movies is based on a couple of real life hucksters. So they just went to the real life hucksters that were the Warrens. They went to that husband and wife that were the Warrens, that were like scam artists or whatever, and they just took their bullshit stories of how they swindled people, and then they made it scary, and they put like real ghosts and stuff in there. And it's they're charlatans. Everybody says that the Warrens were charlatans, and yet they made successful Conjuring movies, and they don't cost a lot of money to make, and they make more money than it costs to make, and people keep going to see these two fake exorcists go around, and they just add special effects, and they spend all the money on black blood and white sclera lenses, and they make creaking bone sounds, and they put CG in there, and they make the bed bounce and all that shit. And and then Stranger Things has Netflix money, and you're watching children being traumatized, and if you are a child watching Stranger Things, then you're being traumatized as a children, or you're disassociating and regressing, remembering your childhood and the nostalgia for it. I remember the 80s. It was cooler. It was better. Sorry. Who wants to be stressed out the way they make people stressed out today with the things that they're really actually doing? That shit wasn't happening in the 80s. And again, depends on where you grew up in the 80s. Some places were horrible. Maybe it's better now for where you live now, but I mean, in general, it's weird now. You know that. And we didn't have all the money spent on horror and gore like they do now for Netflix stuff to make all these awful things happen. So that being said, my review of Stranger Things, I remember seeing it and thinking, yeah, that's all the MK Ultra stuff, and they're torturing kids, and who wants to watch a bunch of kids ride around on bikes and get chopped up and stuff. But now that I've sort of refreshed my memory with it, because I saw some of it over Thanksgiving, like on holiday and stuff, and you watch TV and everything. So I saw some of those, and I was like, this is kind of dumb. Like, Stranger Things is kind of dumb. Like, I don't know what happened to me. Maybe I'm desensitized, but I'm like, this is kind of stupid. I don't mean that it's done badly. I just mean that it's kind of corny. And a lot of stuff that they do doesn't make sense. I can't tell you how many times I had my suspension of disbelief broken. I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. How'd they get away with that? Oh, well, lucky thing that so-and-so showed up here. You know what I mean? Like, they just do all the stuff that you have to put out of your mind and just let it go. Otherwise, it's going to wreck you. Like, that wouldn't happen. Or they would be dead there. Or that guy's guts were getting eaten out, and now he's okay, and he's walking around, and he's flirting. And the guy, had these, for 5 minutes, they keep cutting back that they're eating his guts and he can't get away. And I'm like, how's this guy standing? Stuff like that. Or one of the things that I don't like about Stranger Things is that everybody else gets slaughtered, in seconds, and the demons go around just killing people real quick. But when it's one of the main characters of the show, they get thrown away. Like, there's this one moment where Winona Ryder would have been dead, and you're like, oh shit, she's gonna be dead. And then the monster just throws her. How many times have I seen people, this is one of the most common things that I remember from Stranger Things that I remember complaining about seeing it years ago, was that they throw people up against walls and they smash the wall, or they break the glass, or they throw them into a shelf, and I'm like, your back would be broken. And then it's a kid, and then they just get up and like, oh, and they pretend like, oh, it hurts, and then they're running around. I'm like, no, like getting thrown up against the wall like that, you're done. You're not getting up. Especially if it's a child being like psychically blasted against the wall, you're dead. You're not getting up at least. But that happened over and over again. And where if it's one of the main characters, like they get the Gemogorgon scratches them, and you're like, oh, he's dead. And then they're like, everybody else is dead. Like the demons will hurt the people. The demons will go around killing all these people, but if it's one of the main characters, they get thrown and they survive, or they get a scratch, which would be fatal to everybody else, but then they live. And I'm like, that's, there's so much of that shit in Stranger Things. But there's no denying that people like it. I saw somebody walking around in Stranger Things sneakers. They made like shoes of Stranger Things. I was a teenager and he had Stranger Things canvas sneakers or whatever. I'm like, okay. And I want to go into the upside down and all this stuff and speculating on what it means and stuff. Probably there's other people's videos that talk about like the MK Ultra of it all, because they're into that stuff. I'm not really into that. Like I know about those things, but other people really research all those horrible stuff that our government really did. So I'm just talking about it loosely, but if you want to find out about type up Stranger Things and MK Ultra, if you want to keep hearing about that from somebody else's video, go ahead, they're out there. I haven't seen any of those, but there's no way that they're not out there, because if I can talk about this, I'm sure that there's a dozen other podcasts that know more about all the MK Ultra, Project Monarch, Project Dream Child, and Project Artichoke, and what am I missing? All these things, all the disgusting Kinsey research, which isn't, I would say it's demonic, but it's different. Like letting child predators have at them, and then you're standing behind a glass wall observing and taking notes is disgusting. That's demonic as far as I'm concerned. And if you look into it, like Oppenheimer and Jack Parsons and a lot of our top scientists that came up with huge developments for technology and mankind were openly telling you they were doing occult rituals while they did these experiments. One of the things that Oppenheimer was trying to do was make a homunculi. That's weird. Go look up what a homunculi is. He was trying to make a demon or a golem or something. That's weird. Why was Oppenheimer trying to do that? And Jack Parsons, same. They're all in this weird occult stuff. And Stranger Things is all about that. And I don't know what was in Lost. Did Stranger Things steal from J.J. Abrams' Lost? Because I never watched that one. Because everybody liked it so much. I was like, I don't ever want to see it. The same thing with Breaking Bad. Maybe there's a streak of a contrarian in me. Not that you care about anything that's about me. But Breaking Bad and Lost, I didn't watch because I was like, yeah, everybody likes that so much and they can't shut up about it. I don't ever want to see it. So I couldn't tell you about either one of those things. Even though Breaking Bad's so great. I don't care about a guy that makes meth. I don't want to be sympathetic to a guy that makes meth. Stop watching it. So anyway, I saw Stranger Things, a grim fantasy about, saving the world from demons. That's probably more realistic than a lot of things. Look at how weird CERN is. Did you hear about the CERN Hadron Collider? They made weird cryptic statements like, we fired up the Hadron Collider and something may have come through. Come through from what? You said that the CERN Hadron Collider was for making mini recreations of the Big Bang. Why are you talking about the CERN Hadron Collider like it was Stephen King's The Mist? Oh, guess what? We were doing something at CERN and we opened a portal to another dimension and stuff came through. Which is one of the statements from CERN. Are they messing with us? Why do they have a statue to Kali the Destroyer on when you're going into the grounds where the Hadron Collider is? That's weird. Why do you have the goddess of destruction as your lawn ornament? And you don't have any other lawn ornaments. So anyway, CERN's weird. You want to get weird? Stranger Things isn't scary. What's creepy is the reality of the Gothard Tunnel celebration. You want to watch a ritual? The Gothard Tunnel celebration is a ritual that they wanted the world to see. It's an €8 million one-time only thank you performance. And look at who the audience is when they show audience shots for the outside part of the CERN Hadron Collider. It's weird. It's the rich people paid for that. The richest people in the world paid for that longest underground tunnel in the world that delivers supplies to the CERN Hadron Collider. Look at what was the €8 million one-time only thank you performance. Look at what they perform. They do a mock orgy. The guy comes out with a taxidermy goat head, and there's no music. He just goes, and he's grunting and groaning, and people take off their clothes and they have an orgy. And then the devil, the guy with the goat head, he screws this woman, and she's the Scarlet Woman, and she's Aleister Crowley's Scarlet Woman, and Scarlet Woman of the Bible probably. And then she becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to a demon in a mascot suit that looks like one of the Spike Jonze's Where the Wild Things Are monsters, and it's dancing around. Thanks for the tunnel. That's weird. You want to see what's stranger than Stranger Things? The Gothard Tunnel celebration. There's an inside part and an outside part. They do one part inside the tunnel, and then they do another part in the entrance to the tunnel or whatever, and then they do the loading zone or whatever, and then they do another part outside, and it's disgusting. And I would recommend not watching the whole thing and just skipping around, because when you watch it, you're like participating in that ritual in some kind of weird way. They wanted us to see that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have, professionally shot the videography. That would have been just for them. There wouldn't be just a whole thing where you can watch the whole thing on YouTube, and then you can see, famous politicians and rich people on a train going through the Gothard Tunnel. And it's weird. Oh, look, there's the president of France, and there's the what's her name? Merkel from Germany and whatever, and all this stuff. It's weird. It's real. You know what I mean? Like, why is that? Like, that's the thank you show they're paying for the world's largest underground tunnel. Why would you say thank you with goat horns and a mock orgy and the devil having sex with the Scarlet Woman, and she gets pregnant and gives birth to some kind of Antichrist beast? There's so much other weird stuff about the Gothard Tunnel celebration. They cut the head off the Virgin Mary. They do a mockery of like a Catholic church service or something, and it's weird. So anyway, Stranger Things. I know people are really into it, but now that I've seen some of it again, I'm like, I don't know, maybe something happened to me. I don't know why people like it so much. It's kind of corny. It's not scary, it's corny. And the guy with the suit on, he just looks like a Resident Evil guy. He looks like that guy from Resident Evil he had the one, was it Mutant X or whatever the guy's name is? You know what I'm talking about? He just looks, no, Tyrant. He looks like Tyrant from Resident Evil. Like, Stranger Things is just like, what do you call it? A collage, where they just took all these parts of other things and put it together, and somehow it's still specifically demonic and relatable to real world stuff that our government did and other governments all over the world did to experiment on children, and opening portals to the demonic and offering up children as a blood sacrifice to get technological advancements and forbidden knowledge from demons, and they want blood. And it's a very old ritual. The Incas, the Aztecs, the Mayans, they did this stuff. The old days of worshiping Baal, where they'd put their kids on the fire and offer up their children. Yeah, I mean, maybe the government wasn't offering up their children. They were just like taking other people's kids and experimenting on them. But, it's disgusting, and they really did do that. And you can look up these, if you don't care about Stranger Things, if you want to maybe make your own video on Stranger Things because you've seen it and you really like it a lot, you can look up the Montauk Project, which is in Jim Carrey's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. What's that movie about? It's a Charlie Kaufman script. What it's about is erasing people's minds, which is a thing that they did. There was a one lady, I don't know if I said this in this video, but if I did, I'm going to say it again. If I didn't, you'll hear it now. There was a woman that was having mental problems, and she came and told her story, and nobody denied it. So her family said, okay, why don't you go here to get some mental help? So they put her into like a mental facility, and they experimented on her like a guinea pig along with a lot of other people, and they wiped their minds. And when she came home to her family, she didn't know who she was, she didn't know who her husband was, she didn't know who her kids were, and she couldn't remember anything. Like, they had to teach her like a baby all over again. They literally wiped this woman's mind. And they do that to a lot of people. It's been done. Like, she's not the only one to talk about that, but it is like a public story you can find out about. So there's also Project Montauk. There's also Monarch Mind Control. There's also look up Wizard of Oz Mind Control, Wizard of Oz and Disassociation. You can look up Project Artichoke, Project Dream Child. What's the other one I'm skipping? I don't know, but there's a whole bunch of them. You can look into those like real world things that they actually did, and it's disgusting, and experimented on kids. The Kinsey, look into like I don't know, type up something like the disgusting truth about Kinsey. And what was his first name? Was it Alfred Kinsey? Look up Wilhelm Reich's orgone phenomena, where he made a thing called a wacky shack, and you would go inside and goon, and he would harvest the energy of your coons, which is a weird thing. And they locked him up for his research and then stole the research. Wilhelm Reich created weather tech. He developed early weather tech. He had this thing called the cloudburster gun, where you could point it at the sky and it would make it rain above you. That was Wilhelm Reich. But he was fixated on harvesting the energy of the orgasm. And if you think about what an orgasm is supposed to be, it's when a man and a woman come together. It's how we get here. It's how we're born. So I would imagine that a tremendous amount of energy could be accumulated if it's possible to harvest that energy. It's the act of creation, except if you're gooning or beating off in a shack, in one of his wacky shacks, and he's harvesting the energy, you're just alone. You have half of an equation. There's a man, there's a woman, they join together, and that's how people are created. That's how we get here, right? So if you just have one person, and you can somehow, they invented technology to harvest that energy. You probably harvest a lot of energy. At least people spend a lot of time beating off. What if you did it on purpose and with a machine hooked up to you? A milking machine, of energy harvesting machine or whatever. I don't know. It could be a way that unclean spirits are made. Maybe when you beat off, there's Googolies and Kunlins there, and you're one half of the equation by yourself, beating off or flicking your bean, and then demons are there to pick up the slack, and maybe in some weird occult way, that's how more demons are made. There's a horror movie trope for you. Teenagers beating off makes demons that haunt his house, and he has to fight them, and he has to tell God he's sorry for whacking it. He has to do an exorcism. And God's like, stop playing with yourself. And then part 2 happens because he can't help it. He can't. I can't stop. It's the demons. I made a coomunculi. 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 I don't know. So I'm gonna go now. There's my review of Stranger Things. It ain't over yet, so nobody knows how it ended, but I think it is, it's probably not healthy. It's also not scary. I don't think it's scary. Like, I don't know. I remember it differently. It just seems to be kind of like silly. I don't know. Maybe I don't know other people's opinions of Stranger Things, or maybe I got to go see other people's. Maybe I will check into that. I'll try and find somebody's authoritative review of Stranger Things, where they talk about all this MK Ultra stuff, and that I can't even, couldn't possibly get right because I'm not that involved in learning about it or whatever. But I said enough. So that's all. Stranger Things, you don't need that. probably they saved the world, and whoever the most alpha male characters are that maintain their masculinity will probably have to die to give their lives for everybody else. But it's going to be resolved by a woman. That's in the end, what's going to happen. They're going to take all the most masculine characters, have them die, and it's going to be kind of uneventful, and like, that's not a great way to die. And I guess he's dead now. And then girls are going to save. It's all going to be girl power, and then girls are going to do everything and save everything. And if it wasn't for these women, you know what I mean? It's just like part of the, like, if you make something and they give you a lot of money, you have to demoralize men and say men stand down and all that shit. So probably whoever, like, the coolest characters are that everybody likes, they're going to traumatize you by killing them. And the only characters left will be LGBTQ, and they'll be the heroes that have all the power and save everyone and everything. I bet the most powerful people, Eleven's going to decide to be a lesbian, whatever it is. Who gives a shit? It's garbage.